We have to understand that there are different levels to this, and whichever level you're concerned with will inform your judgment of Destiny's response to the Trump assassination attempt, the death. There are a couple ways to look at it. First, you can focus on the level of should an assassination attempt actually be condemned? It's just kind of simple. Then there's another level of should we or Destiny or any commentator be expected to condemn it individually, vocally, and if so, who? Why the Dems? Just because Trump is the Republican nominee? No, they're saying the Dems have engaged in violent rhetoric, have encouraged such acts implicitly and even at times explicitly. That's the very definitive claim you see being passed around. So when they ask someone to condemn the shooting in this light, you could see it as some implication of lumping all the Dems together and holding them accountable for this. This opens up a whole new conversation about rhetoric and the political environment, which side is more unhinged, and should an individual have to answer for a side. Of course, in each individual conversation, like on Piers Morgan, they can say, oh, I'm not asking you to answer for it. I'm not holding you guilty.
I'm not asking for that. I'm asking you to condemn what happened.
But at the same time, Dave Smith or Candace Owens or Tim Pool, they all go back to their own platforms and say the rhetoric brought this on, this is what they've caused.
But the point is, we simply can't rule out them trying to get him killed again. Or
the world saw Joe Biden for what he really was. A plan was put in motion, and that plan was get rid of Donald Trump. We have to kill him. Plain and simple. This isn't a conspiracy, okay?
All a big joke on MSNBC, but the intent of it was very clear. They wanted to use lawfare to ultimately cause the death of Donald Trump.
Biden is a permissive culture of violence that has exploded on in today's left wing.
Of course, but you also have to understand that there has been an entire media machine, mainstream media machine and Democrat elite that for years, since before Donald Trump was president, have been calling him Hitler and his supporters Nazis. What would someone do if they truly believe that?
So when someone challenges Destiny to condemn the shooting, he may be reacting more to this level. And this is certainly the more honest reading of what's going on a portion of the time. I'd say a large portion of the time, depending on the individual. It is a more honest reading of what's going on. I mean, I'll get to that later anyway. You can imagine a talk show where one single commentator wakes up every morning, gives his opinions on the moral state of certain actions, and every morning is saying what Democrats should and shouldn't do, what the public should and shouldn't do, who should condemn what every time. This guy has established a track record of a certain moral standard, and then if he denies the idea that this specific attack should be condemned, this is a clear mark of hypocrisy or tribalism. You could also have a more legally or policy-focused guy who already assumes it's obvious attacks should be condemned. He actually discusses things of substance. He gets at the laws of democracy, why they are written the way they are, historical precedent, the little tweaks and quibbles that have far-reaching implications. He talks about how certain interpretations can be devastating, factual inconsistency in the political views of... He would wake up and start talking about what the attack means for the country, how policy should change, history, etc. He would be exhausted if his audience railed at him every time to denounce illegality and violence at the beginning of every single video. This would be ridiculous. You can have a security expert talking about how the Secret Service failed, how the approach must change, theorizing regarding conspiracies. All of these people have a different area of focus, function in a different sort of conversation, and the moral judgment of it is wrong to shoot a candidate or anyone in the United States, that moral judgment is already assumed, built in. Destiny feels that the following is obvious. He has shown he stands for democracy. He has thousands of hours of his thoughts on why America is great, how democracy should work, rule of law. He's decried violence in more controversial cases than this, when others in the country were justifying it on both sides. He feels he's more consistent when it comes to like Rittenhouse, BLM, how to discuss and classify those things on the broad level of the movement, how to discuss each particular case of rioting or violence or self-defense. In fact, in his view, he stood for these fundamental values more strongly than his opponents, and they're only pretending to stand for these values now because it benefits them tribally, monetarily. They're partisan hacks to him, and he sees their partisan hackmanship as a far more pressing, concerning, a far more living danger than some meme-level pretense they tweet out suggesting that he's somehow aligned with assassination attempts.
Not just because it's not just the jokes, it's the underlying substantive analysis as well. It's the lack of responsibility for January 6th. It's the lack of responsibility for the Gretchen plot. It's the lack of accountability for all the comments made about BLM protesters, George Floyd,
by your yardstick,
for all of these.
By your yardstick.
He looks around at the outcry and he does not believe it is true compassion. Now keep in mind again, he is a somewhat sociopathic, very rational and coldly analytical guy. Even Steelmanning him, I have to acknowledge that. I mean, he knows this. He always attempts to get at the facts of a matter, to find the true best path, to advocate it with compelling words. And that's what he does. That's his arc over and over again, consistently. Unless he's just engaging in e-drama, which is annoying and happily diminishing. But the people who get mad at him always revile him for what? For having blue hair, for being divorced, for being poly. Can you really find such a narrow bandwidth of insults? He's consistent in his worldview across the years. As specific situations pop up, he applies it. And when people are offended, they don't engage with actual substance. They insult something totally disconnected. Like his being poly, as if it doesn't actually align from whatever the worldview he's constructed and just coherently presented. He, on the other hand, reviles others by pointing out inconsistency, hypocrisy, ignorance, laziness. These things are substantive. They're actually connected to the matter of contention. I'm going to get more direct criticism later, give more. But the point here was that with his approach, both instinctive, kind of natural personality, but also intentional, of cold, detached analysis, he could be less likely to attribute true warmth and compassion to the communications of others, and more likely to view their communications through his lens of what things mean for the actual politics and culture and laws and so on. The signals Destiny engages with in life are these sorts of signals, not the human, warm, fuzzy empathy signals, because he sees them as unrelated to what everyone else supposedly wants to discuss in his space, in his profession. So, first, maybe he's tuned to discount empathy too much, but mostly, given his experience with people refusing to engage on substance, I think he correctly points out that the empathy actually is usually a hollow signal, not warm and fuzzy at all. This is where we get to the source of not only his disinterest in condemning, but his active insults and jokes. He's talked about this over and over when it comes to, again, BLM, Rittenhouse, police activity, feminism, anti-feminism, whatever, Israel-Palestine. Look at his opinion on one I share, on UNRWA and the Palestinian refugee problem. It's terrible. There's suffering. Compassionate people want it to end, right? But it just perpetuates and perpetuates because no deal is reached, because no capable, good faith negotiating authority is cohered behind, because no international pressure is applied. Blanket aid keeps coming. Resolutions keep being passed in the UN, which is not, by the way, a democratic arbiter. It doesn't have any motivation to represent the best interests of any particular party or of humanity as a whole, which is something I think we need to understand about the UN. I'll probably say more on that in future videos. So the resolutions continue to serve effectively as kind of pointless signaling. Then you have all these Western protesters on $100,000 tuitions signaling and demanding humanitarian aid. You have pro-Palestinian commentators, debaters, scholars, not actually reading documents, not reading international law and law of armed conflict, not reading books on the history, not knowing who governed who and when, not being able to define genocide or war crime or apartheid, not doing any of the actual difficult, gritty, nuanced work to understand the complexity of the situation. And how do they engage with Destiny's arguments?
Hilarity of your obvious contempt for the lack of intellectual rigor that Destiny brought to the debate. But
I'm a lot more literate than you, Mr. Borelli.
I'm going to believe that. Also, substantively, you know, both you and Muin Rabbani were just so thorough and persuasive. And
the problem, Mr. Morelli, is you don't know the English language.
You each brought different things to the debate, different kind of attitudes that have had effect working, I think, in tandem.
All due respect, you're such a fantastic moron. It's terrifying.
Different tonal modes that I think played well with each other.
Borelli, please don't teach me about the English language. But I am taking my sledgehammer to the porcelain vase. I am going to smash it to smithereens. So every time Muin got into a serious mode, as he answered that thing called Destiny, I was what the fuck are you doing, Muin?
All blue hair. So after he streams, 10 hours a day researching, reading, writing out his views, speaking to excerpts, writing documents with links and references, after he does all that, and he sees someone showing compassion for the Palestinian refugees, he's inclined more towards scorn and, yes, derision than he is towards a responsive, oh wow, I should be more compassionate like them. Is this practical? Is it cold-hearted? Is it accurate? Do they deserve that scorn maybe because they're the ones perpetuating suffering? These can be difficult questions to answer. I think there's understandable views on both sides. Is there a difference between the most useful thing Destiny can do and the best human action he can take in terms of something heartwarming? If you're going to show compassion, but if it's substantively hollow, it's worth nothing. It's worse than nothing. It's not only hollow, but it's prompting you to signal things that don't align with reality. Compassion is not a virtue alone. It's just a reaction. It's an impulse. Your brain says, pain, You're unthreatened yourself. Your body is safe. You see something like a human face in pain. You hear a human cry. Your empathy circuits activate. Some simulation of the pain leaps into being in your mind. You shudder, cry out, and you're feeling compassion. Okay, that's a human thing, and it's important, and it's linked to all sorts of virtues in all parts of life that we enjoy. But as soon as you choose to broadcast this as a political commentator to a certain audience with a certain rhetoric, as soon as you demand that the other side condemn, you're taking this compassion reaction that we do sort of expect in the human brain, and you're nesting it in all this other stuff. So what it means to express compassion becomes a different thing. Is he being asked to just nod and say, yes, I do condemn this? Is that even a worthwhile thing to ask of people? Remember all the black squares for George Floyd, then the vaccine stamp on a profile picture, then the Ukrainian flag, Palestinian, whatever. Is there anything easier than doing this, signaling this in the modern age? Is there anything that requires less courageous investigation, more conformity than this? Or do people just hop on that train while it's hot to galvanize their base in whatever way possible for another week? Is Destiny being asked to condemn assassination? Or is he being asked to say, yes, you're right, my side attacked your side because of rhetoric I engage in, and you rightfully pressure me to condemn this because I share something of the guilt? I mean, you look around and you see Tim Pool, Candace Owens, I used to like her, Steven Crowder, Michael Knowles, Matt Walsh, even people like Joe Rogan, Piers Morgan. You see them nodding sagely and saying, you see what happens when you encourage violence. Look at all of this. And this is where it becomes difficult because it starts branching off from the level of the individual commentator and cascading into all these other levels. There's what an individual communicates, how it's received. There's like the bulk of their fans who are probably nice people but do leave the occasional tribal comment on a YouTube video. There's the true psychos who really believe the other side is evil and really believe our nation is under violent threat. And if they really believe that and thus justify their extreme action, well, doesn't that force the other side to as well? Is that good? Whose fault is it? Destiny's been saying that if the other side doesn't engage in democracy, his side can't either because collective respect is necessary for the democratic process to function. Good, yes. Well, I guess then it just becomes a shouting match over which side started the decline from democracy. At what point it becomes hopeless to honor democratic values. Then you both just sort of fight it out and might makes right, I guess, and there's no other possible outcome. So yeah, that's why I think Destiny's rhetoric does go too far and does preclude improvement. He's saying he can't talk to the other side. He doesn't grant them moral standing. He believes they are too thoroughly delusional. And I just disagree with him here. I think some fringe population probably lives and breathes headlines and content. Many of those are probably rabid. And I think the bulk of people living ordinary lives are really much more in touch with what it's like to see another parent at a kid's football game, talk about the coaching drama, ask about the school district, smile. Destiny's been talking about how we're nested in this context of social connection and all the sorts of values and activities and media our communities engage with. He's been saying people are often startlingly willing to consider facts objectively and even perhaps have facts already in their heads, but they just don't get down and grapple with it all because of social ease, because of what life is about for most people most of the time they're going around interacting. So, I don't know. On one hand, he seems to say the internet space is coming to define reality much more strongly, and all the beliefs and rhetoric and insanity bleeds very directly into the real world, and I think this is disturbingly true. Internet is strange. We're not prepared. All the information is so beyond us now. But then on the other hand, he talks about these social webs and the fact that people are willing to think, and he has parents who are conservatives, and I really struggle to accept that he actually thinks the Republican Party is defined by true insanity completely. If he thinks that, he just doesn't have a pulse on what's really going on and how we could possibly change it. Now, I do think there's a huge bulk of people who don't know much, vote kind of stubbornly for their party, and will smile at you on the street and then make fun of you to their family. These aren't the Twitter-obsessed extremists, but they're also not really willing to have an open conversation. They're probably just more isolated in their communities. Rural America comes to mind. I've worked on some ranches where it would be tough to have a truly informed conversation. Trump will be supported no matter what. And yes, this is concerning because insurrection and whatnot did go on, and that could change our country. But are the values of these people really mapping onto that, or are they just ignorant? And does that mean conversation's impossible? And does that mean jokes are justified? And does that mean the overall spirit of the entire... I don't think Destiny can say it's willful ignorance at that point. I especially don't think he can say those people define any party sufficiently for us to shut down all conversation. It's a bit bizarre given this position he tries to hold of maximal openness, moderation, of opinions formed uniquely according to each situation. He must understand that if he's going to change culture, it's going to happen in speaking to the people on the fringes of the other side, people who are willing to engage and change. And it's always going to be a fringe, but yeah, I think he's wrong about the party overall, and I think he knows it. I think we'll see him continue to speak to conservatives and make nuanced arguments and upset both sides equally. That's his strength. He's just gone on a thing about illiberalism on the far left, which is completely accurate, and he's not going to shut down conversations about that just because it supports the right. The thing about Destiny is he doesn't see tons of purpose in talking with people who agree with him. So this is where we get to the last part. He wouldn't see a need to talk to the right where he agrees with them, and where he disagrees with them, he supposedly now sees them as truly untouchable, inaccessible. Bringing it back to the assassination thing, he's concerned with this, the inaccessibility of facts. He's been engaging with facts, substance for years, for hours every day, reading, writing, researching, debating, the jot and tittle of the law, policy, phone calls and indictments, and election fraud and insurrection. Our awareness of these things determines the direction the country goes. This is engagement with reality. This is an understanding of who Trump is and what he could do, who Biden is and what he could do, how much power the president does have, ought to have, what's actually going on at the border. What is actual? This, to Destiny, is what our empathy and our virtue must ultimately inform. If reality is not impacted in the end, if we're delusional, they're not true virtues.
I think that the discourse in the United States has gotten so unbelievably out of whack in that the amount of moral condemnation that we have for certain types of messages is not at all mapping onto the amount of damage a particular idea or thing is doing.
So yeah, he makes a few very strong jokes, I agree. Too strong. And I think a good portion of it is probably trolling, baiting. I'll note again, he did make strong jokes about Palestine, Bushnell. He makes rape jokes. Why no outcry then? So it's very selective, the outcry. He's revealing hypocrisy in the other side, and he would say he's being consistent. It's upsetting people uniquely not because they have true empathy, but because they're looking for a tribal political victory. You open up YouTube and you see him condemned by Candace Owens, Holocaust denier, moon landing denier.
Disaster growing up. Mine was global warming. They don't even say it anymore.
They don't say global warming anymore?
No, they don't. No, they say climate change. They went.
Do you believe people landed on the moon?
Well, let's just back that up.
Because if you don't, then I think that's
no.
I think that really sets a standard for this
thread to now apply to a conversation about climate change.
Okay, but just to be clear, people did land on the moon.
I don't know.
Okay, there we go.
I don't know.
I do know.
I just want to know why we didn't go back. I even debate you. You're sitting here telling me that 12 men have gone to the moon since. I don't know anything about it. And so I keep a very... Okay. I think that if there's one thing that people will say about me is I don't come into conversations about things that I don't know. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be an expert on the moon landing.
But you're such a brilliant...
So I only want to say that because I did have, and I'm interjecting here, I did have a conversation with someone whose parents...
Is she going to debate with Dave against him? Why? No shot. Did she cut Dave off on like the first back and forth? Is that really about to happen?
Parents were forced out in, I want to say 1945. Is that the correct year?
48.
Near flat earther Candace Owens, apparently nowadays. The just asking questions are...
I've read the indictment, and I do want to make it clear. The words human sex trafficking occur on the indictment, but then it makes it very clear that what they're referring to is they've kind of extended the term. It's not what we think about in America.
They did not expand the term. This is the UN's definition of human trafficking through use of force or other forms of coercion, fraud, and deception. It has been the definition of trafficking.
Who advocates, if not pro-Putin, then at least isolationist policy without even ever displaying that she knows the first thing about geopolitics or international relations. Like, okay, Ben Shapiro mentions how lots of politicians are isolationists in theory, then they actually get into office and realize how tangled up everything is. You don't treat with the world, and suddenly you find yourself alone against these cadres of cooperation that can threaten your military, economics, technological stability. So then Ben talks about historic examples where this has been the case, and everyone, when they get into office, becomes much more globalist, whatever the term is, non-isolationist, interventionist, and he cites actual events, alliances, trade benefits, wars, presidents. Candace Owens never does this. And when she does, you feel like she has someone in the back that researched and gave her like a headline, and like, I'll talk about that more later. But Destiny feels like the bulk of the Republican Party at this point is governed by this sort of madness. All the bulk of the people tearing him apart for his jokes, asking him to condemn the shooter, they don't deserve it. It's not their place to point at him, and they're not even pointing to where he's standing. He sees the rise of absolute nonsense, utter rejection of our media and other institutions, and nothing rigorous to replace it with. There's no investigative journalism, there's no actual reading, there's no earnest truth-seeking from so many of the new media, the new independents, whatever. They tweet out their memes, they slyly like the tweets of even more radical followers, and then they spend every show of every day just doing commentary on commentary on commentary about what lyrics the latest celebrity put in his song, or skipping actual law and legal hearings and just giving the final conservative spin on the most basic headline of why some possible interpretation of the Trump immunity case or the false elector scheme could maybe be safe as long as the Supreme Court stays true and people are kind of good, and as long as we just accept Trump's rule for 4 years and don't question it then. And so yeah, Destiny sees this all as more morally abhorrent, more actually dangerous than a joke about someone who's dead. And he's right. His cold hardness does not make his arguments less valid, not unless you can show how it bleeds through his actual perception of the world down to his arguments' facts. Now, does that make the joke good? Probably not. I wouldn't do it. Some people are saying there's a symmetry here. Conservatives have made fun of Pelosi, called Biden and whoever else fascists and commies and whatever. Now liberals are making fun of Trump. There are some important differences to be made. If you feel like the other, or distinctions, I guess, if you feel like the other side is engaged in a certain rhetoric or insult, you may feel they're embodying a certain spirit, and you may wish to cast it back in their face to make a point. This can be good or bad. It gets a bit messy when it's individuals making individual jokes, and you're attributing the same overall spirit to the entire party. This is what I'm criticizing in Destiny's blanket sweep of the conservatives, and this is what I criticize when conservatives react to wokeness by advocating Christian nationalism or something like that. Destiny's point, though, is that he's engaged in substance. So when he insults someone, makes a joke about Palestine or Sneeko, he's not only observing true incoherencies in their argument, he's pointing out how the incoherency leads also to something which is fun to insult.
People more powerful than me are telling me to do it, I instantly don't believe them.
Okay, do you understand that that just makes you a sheep of the other herd, right?
Of what herd?
If there is a shepherd and he says all the sheep go left, you can either choose your own path or you can go right because he told you to go left. You understand you're being justice controlled, right?
So who's
all I ever hear you guys talk about are cars, mansions, 30 hoes. Why?
Word. Because that's dope. That's like,
do you understand that when you talk about like a spiritual void, do you think that a spiritual void exists today in the Western world? You're the male Kim Kardashian. That's the whole point.
This is very different than someone who's just running to a cuck joke or a blue hair joke every time they have no response to one of his arguments. There's also the proximity factor. Of course, this is important. We hear a joke about a Palestinian or a Russian, and we have more of an analytical response. We appreciate the cleverness, the point it illustrates in context. It's funny, we laugh. The absurdity of life is an important part of getting at its truth and surviving it. We hear jokes about atrocities in the past, and we don't feel the immediate urge to condemn them or disassociate ourselves with them. But then someone shot here in our country at a rally for an ongoing election. Of course, it has a different feeling. This is a human thing. We've evolved to resonate on this personal, tribal, present level. It represents more immediate things to us. The functioning of our democracy, our immediate personal safety. It has this palpable ripple effect on the people we interact with every day. This is something that is human. It's probably good, but also from Destiny's very incisive, practical view, it may just be another feeling that misleads us, that blinds us from the far greater danger of the substantive evil going on in conservative rhetoric and ignorance, which is more morally reprehensible, making the joke or spending years not pressuring Trump to share his tax returns while you ask for Biden's health records as a meme, justifications for Mar-a-Lago, Trump actively hiding and moving documents, setting up false electors, calling people to pressure them to accept illegitimate electors, personally calling people involved in the investigation after, and pressuring them as the investigation is ongoing, and all the Republican platform media people either ignore it completely or omit bits and then kind of finagle to justify the rest in a way they would never do for the other side. That's probably how Destiny feels. I don't agree 100%, but I agree largely. Also important, all the while the mainstream media is reporting on most of these ongoing things, is doing actual research and investigation, employs fact checkers. There are problems with the mainstream media, absolutely. There are problems with our institutions. The situation is grave. And I'm not a liberal. I don't know what I am. I grew up in a very conservative home. Thought myself a staunch conservative as I started to absorb and enjoy politics, then realized just no one really knew anything below surface level headlines and meta commentary, so I couldn't really trust anyone. So nowadays I just sort of shrug and say, I don't know my political affiliation, but if you ask me enough questions and press me for specifics, I'll probably end up somewhere with some sort of label. I prefer to just form my opinions on specific things as I learn about them, as I know about them, and withhold judgment on the rest. But the point is, as someone who has roots in conservatism and who wants to see the conservative glory restored, and American glory, and liberal glory, I'm saddened to say that today, however corrupt our legacy institutions might be, they're more fidelitous than the new wave I see rising. We're in an age of overinformation, a digital storm. People. We need to hold to something more than our individual algorithms. The algorithms are not selecting for truth, harmony, or use even. Our individual algorithms are selecting to bring money, which means drive engagement, which means polarization, echo chambers, fracturing. America's a fantastic place. I have my complaints. I've lived all my adult life overseas. I have good friends of many cultures. There's a good chance I'll live somewhere else long term, just because I really do enjoy it. But America, the more you travel the world, the more you realize it is a fantastic place. Or if you don't, I think you're blind and dishonest. We have so much here. It's like traveling, just being here. You have space and true freedom and diversity of ideas, which is so precious. That's the main thing I've come to prize. I may live elsewhere long term, but I have decided I definitely need to live somewhere Western diverse, because the spectrum of inner human experiences and ideas available is just so much broader. And America has a lot of that. We are so diverse. With this comes increased creativity, innovation, communication. But with this also comes greater chaos, the potential for fracture, permeable borders. We need to protect this place we have, built on the free and courageous exploration of ideas, built on the idea that if everyone speaks the things they believe, those things will go out into the world and be tested against the other things. And if we respect the process and engage earnestly, the best possible future will emerge. This is the idea of freedom. This is the idea of the thinking human. This is the idea of the sovereign individual. The idea that the healthiest collective is built with healthy individuals. Okay, this was just a quick video, kind of the flow of thought that emerged as things were happening. I didn't really take time to do tons of additional research, gather quotes, get an exact chronology of things, tweets, obviously. So I know I missed stuff, and I'm hoping to do a deeper analysis of political rhetoric overall pretty soon here. I wanted to get this out quickly, though, as I'm already somewhat late, so here it is. But if I missed anything too egregious, be sure to drop a comment, let me know. If we're going to make things better, that's how it needs to start. Cheers. Oh, and here's to starting politics on this channel. Eesh.